Hello and welcome to the weekly BB Bobcat Breakdown, where a couple of Texas State students dive into the details of Texas State athletic events that occur each week. And before we get started, I just wanted to mention this is our 10th podcast together. We've had a lot of amazing guest speakers throughout, and it's been just an amazing experience this semester with us only having 2 more podcasts left within these next coming weeks. So just wanted to mention that. It's just been an honor to be able to talk to you and share the news of everything Texas State athletics. And with that in mind, the way to learn is by listening, the way to listen is by learning, and the only way to start is by starting, so let's get into it. I'm your host, Luke Fox. I'm a sophomore here at Texas State. I'm majoring in electronic media.
Hello, my name is Jacob Farhat. I'm a junior here at Texas State, and I'm majoring also in electronic media.
My name is Grady Elbell. I'm a senior here at Texas State, and I'm majoring in electronic media.
And my name is Kobe Arriaga. Pleasure to be here. I'm a senior here at Texas State, and I major in journalism.
Yeah, we've got a couple of games that we're going to be talking about this episode, with the first one being the Texas State football win against GA Southern. An amazing win. Going into that game, I knew it was going to be a close game, but it was actually a lot less close than I expected. After that, we're going to be hitting basketball for the first time of this. We're officially going into the spring season with both men's and women's basketball. The men's basketball unfortunately had a loss for the first game against Little Rock, but the women's basketball had an amazing win against ABU. And then finally, we're going to end off with volleyball. 2 games versus Troy and 1 game versus Coastal Carolina that occurred yesterday. Okay, so 3 games there, a lot to talk about with volleyball, but let's get right into it. All right, let's go into this football game. Texas State versus Georgia Southern. This was a home game, so there was a lot of attendance there. I was there at that game. It was a very amazing game. And going into it, ending it off, it was a score of 45-24 win for Texas State. And it was actually really interesting because going into that first quarter, it was actually a 10-7 loss. And then quickly after that first quarter, Texas State just soared ahead. Going into that second quarter, Texas State scored 24 points unanswered compared to GA Southern, and then just took that lead and ran with it, just going so far and not really giving GA Southern a chance to really catch their breath and catch up. So that was just an outstanding game. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think everybody was on their game this game, but I know, of course, last game was a loss, so this was good to end on like a good note and like absolutely dominate. I do want to point out, though, that recently I saw something on the Texas State football's social media that TJ Finley, a quarterback, earned some recognition for Manning O'Brien Awards, as well as Joey Hobart. He got selected for the Bolitnikov Award watch list after being among the nation's top receivers through the first 3 quarters of the season. Hobart earns national recognition. That's what it said in the our Texas State's football Instagram. And also Mason Shipley was named Lou Gross Award semifinalist top 20, which is given as the nation's top place kicker, which is very awesome to hear about our team getting recognized. Just want to point that out a little bit.
And it's funny you mentioned the first 2 guys there, TJ Finley and Joey Hobart. They had incredible performances in that game, particularly TJ Finley, who easily had a top 10 quarterback performance for this game week in NCAA. 3 touchdowns, 301 yards, 12 rushing attempts. And honestly, it's just incredible that he was able to have that kind of output for this team, which historically has struggled at that position in the last few years. So it's great to see that kind of transition for our team. And then Joey Hobart also had a touchdown in this game and 141 receiving yards, 13 receptions. That's incredible alone. So the fact that we did all that plus, bowl eligibility, which we'll get to, is incredible for this game.
Yeah, you think of TJ Finley, you think of Joey Hobart, and it just seems like all season long these two have just been connecting in the end zone, been connecting for 15 yards apiece, almost. And you really think of TJ Finley like, man, he's done a really incredible job here with this football program. And I honestly got to thank, Coach Kinney as well for recruiting him and bringing him on here. You can really see that TJ Finley is a star. And on top of that, this is a big bounce back game for TJ Finley. You think about that Troy game where we lost. That was a big game for us, for Texas State, which we ended up losing. And TJ kind of struggled. He had 2 first half interceptions in that game. And so he comes back, he bounces back really, really well. He get, almost a 20-point victory here back in San Marcos. So, hats off to TJ Finley, and also hats off to Joey Hobart, because, man, all season long, Joey has just been making incredible catches all over the field, So it's really impressive to watch. And honestly, football has come a long way. You think of last year, we really haven't been that successful in the past 5 years or so. So, it's really exciting to watch our football program just being turned around right before our eyes, honestly.
Yeah, we have TJ Finley killing as a quarterback. We have, Joey Hobart, as you've mentioned, killing as receiving. And then also Ismail Mahdi just being the king of rushing. And it's really been those three that have been working together, and they've just really nailed out every single spot. And with those three, those tag team performances, it's just been absolutely killing it. And with, like you were saying, we've had Texas State has had a couple of rough years in the past, but with this year coming around, we've just been breaking records constantly, and we've been breaking losing streaks. I know going into GA Southern, it was like a 5 losing streak in a row, broke that. Going into Coastal Carolina next week, that's right now a 3 losing streak. Hopefully we're going to break that. And so there's this losing streak after losing streak. We're just being able to crack those open and be able to show what Texas State is really made up of. And that's just been really amazing. And I just wanted to point out that going against GA Southern was a very entirely different game than going compared to our last week's game against Troy. That was very different. And here's what I noticed is that Troy completely relied on getting those passing yards, getting those receiving yards, okay? Their quarterback absolutely killed it, and they basically did absolutely no rushing whatsoever. But going into this game, we have Jalen White with 159 yards compared to Ismail Mahdi's 99 yards. Jalen White getting 2 touchdowns. They focused almost entirely compared to passing to getting those rushing yards. And so going against those teams in the past, Texas State has been able to handle defending against rushing yards compared to passing yards, as we have the number 1 offensive team. So whenever you go into that defensive scenario, it can get a little bit iffy at times, but they've been able to hold down the fort with whenever it comes down to rushing yards. And so that's been absolutely amazing to see for Texas State football. And going to this game, Texas State was 5-3, and then GA Southern was 6-2. So GA Southern didn't really have a whole lot to lose going to this game. They've already gotten bowl eligibility, but Texas State has a lot to lose. They only had a couple of games really left in the season, so they had to get that last win to get that bowl eligibility and beat that, and finally got that for the first time since 2014. And it was amazing to watch GJ Kinney and Kelly Dempos jump into the river together for that. They made a promise at the beginning that if they got bowl eligibility, that would be their little tradition there. So that was really amazing to see how we can really get our president into this football scenario. So that's been awesome to see. And then just one last thing to notice is that penalties. We've been seeing a lot of penalties within these last couple of games, and Texas State is kind of been falling apart in that regard. Looking at this, Texas State had 9 penalties for 77 yards, compared to GA with 7 penalties for 58 yards. And so hopefully within these next couple of games that they can really tone that down just a little bit, because if you're just giving away free yards like that, then you're just setting yourself up for defeat. And but on the vice versa, Texas State had no interceptions, and that's been very different because Texas State is kind of known for having a couple of interceptions every game. But going into this game, GA Southern had 1 interception compared to Texas State having none. So with that, the mistakes were minimalized, and they were able to have such a strong lead from which was never really expected to occur. So, and with that, going to this next game,
so for this next game, kind of adding on to what Luke's saying here, so Texas State is already bowl eligible, technically with their 6th win. They are 6-3. However, they do still have 3 games left this season. Our next game is away in Conway, to my knowledge, I believe. And so with that, they want to strengthen their bowl bids, whatever bowl they go into. They actually have 8 bowls that they can go into that the Sun Belt is eligible for. Those are the Boca Raton Bowl, the Camellia Bowl, the Cure Bowl, the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, the First Responder Bowl, the Frisco Bowl, the Myrtle Beach Bowl, and the New Mexico Bowl. I would think for our fans' sake, and I don't know what bowl we will go into just yet. Season hasn't come to an end. We will make a bet here probably soon. But for our fans' sake, it would be cool to do the Frisco Bowl since it's within Texas. But honestly, any of these bowls would be great for our program, regardless of where it is.
Yeah, and you think of the bowl games, and it's really exciting, for Texas State to be eligible for a bowl game for the first time in about 10 years. On top of that, with the success, we've seen so much of a fan and such an energy level in the arena that it kind of boosts, Texas State and just the team in general in order to be able to get these tough wins. And you mentioned the very end of the season, these last couple of games are going to be extremely important. If this team wants to make a bowl game, they're going to have to do just a little bit more, because in my opinion, I think 6 games is great, but 6 games may not be enough to get that bowl game. I think 7, maybe even 8 games is going to be, our top bid for that, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I feel like the name of this, the word for the season has just been morale. And going to this game, fans, Texas State students were a little skeptical, going into the season, fans were a little skeptical. We were like, hey, we just got a new coach. How's this going to turn out? We've got a whole bunch of transfers. This could have gone any way. And then seeing each game pan out as the season has progressed, and to see Texas State being able to dominate some crazy games, starting off with that Baylor win, and just be able to see all of that, and then just seeing these stadiums start to pile up with more and more Texas State students as their hopes have increased to amazing heights. And just to be able to see all that, it's been a truly amazing experience to see Texas State really develop over this season. And going to this bowl is going to be no different. If we can get a couple more wins, get into Frisco Bowl, we can have such an amazing turnout that is going to be so incredible and will mark history. So that would be very interesting to go into that. So. All right, and with that, their next game is going to be next week, November 11th, so that's just in a couple of days, actually tomorrow, and that's going to be an away game at Brooks Stadium, and this is going to be Texas State versus Coastal Carolina, as I mentioned earlier. Looking at the season scores, Texas State is 6-3, Coastal Carolina is also 6-3, both have made bowl eligibility, but even though they've made bowl eligibility, now is not the time to slow down. Now is the time to speed it up as fast as possible so that Texas State can make it into the bowl that they really want to go for, and so that we can really have an amazing season. Right now, as I mentioned, they're on a 3-loss streak against Coastal Carolina, but hey, Texas State just beat a 5-loss streak. They can beat a 3-loss streak, no problem. Yeah, now is not the time to slow down, but with that, let's get into our next sport. All right, now to talk about basketball, and this is the first time we've been kind of coming and talking about and bringing up what it's going to be like to go into basketball for the spring season finally starting up, and we've been talking about these games, and we're going to start off in men's basketball, Texas State versus Little Rock, and this was November 6th. It was an away game. Men's basketball doesn't really have any home games for a couple of weeks. Probably taken up by women's basketball and volleyball, which is still coming to a close. And the final score of this game was 66-71 loss for Texas State. And that was a very close game going to this. And looking at just the first half, it was a 34-38 points, so that was only a 4-point difference. And then the second half was a 32-33, only a 1-point difference. This was a close game going into it, or just ending it off. And just to do a quick recap, because we're starting off this fall season, with men's basketball, they had a 16-19 and 6-12 conference in the last 2020 to 2023 season. So overall, not super crazy impressive, but still that's still an important, impressive deed that they were able to accomplish last season. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they were really able to develop. And we've had a lot of teams this fall, with it being soccer, volleyball, and football, all performing a lot higher than expected. So I think basketball is going to be no different from that. And that's going to be really interesting to see how, as this team develops. But with that in mind, with a new season comes new players. So what players do you think stand out for you guys?
I think looking at this past game, some of the ones I'm about to mention aren't new, but in terms of this season, they still have a lot to prove in terms of the university that they go to and the team that they're on. But, since the Little Rock game, we can look back at the stats and who had a really good game. And, Joshua Ogaro, Brandon Love, and Dante Horn all had very good.
Got to be excited about the return of Drew Drennan, but ultimately, in my opinion, I think Brandon Love is going to be one of the, I wouldn't say top dogs because it looks like we've got a lot of dogs on this team. And as of right now, by the looks of it, it is just one game. It's hard to kind of analyze everything into like a T, but I think Brandon Love is going to be a really good fit for the program, and I think he's kind of going to bring a lot of energy to the team as well. And you think about, the loss, it's a tough loss, but at the end of the day, it is, of course, of a long season. So there's definitely some time you can go and turn it around and, figure out who that number one option or that number two option is going to be nearing the end of the season. Because ultimately, you just want to get better before conference play. All these, pre-conference kind of matchups are going to just kind of test the team and see really where we stand ultimately. But it'll be very exciting to see who's going to be that top dog, who's going to be the number one option, and what they're going to choose to do with him.
For sure, and that was kind of what I was pointing out as well, and you did a great job of elaborating on that point. Thank you. And going into this game, Little Rock, it has just left the Sun Belt Conference as well. They were recently departed in the last 2 years from the Sun Belt. They were one of the teams we dropped. So it's very, recent opponents. We're very familiar with Little Rock and the way that they play over the years. So this was a good test for the team, against an opponent who we've known, with guys who have a lot to prove for this team. And so I think it's a good test for these guys.
Yeah, and I mean, hats off to Little Rock, They played a really good game. They closed out that game very well. I think, Texas State trailed by 11 points in the second half and ultimately was, kind of mounting a comeback there. But, Little Rock was able to kind of hold them off nearing the end of the 3-minute mark. And they were able to really take control of the game towards the end. And Texas State just didn't have an answer, So hats off to Little Rock. I mean, it's a great win for them. And I think for Texas State, it's just going to be a learning experience. And there may be, many learning experiences as the course of the season goes on. There's going to be a lot of tough tests for this team, and like I said, they're just really going to have to find out who's going to be that guy and how they're going to choose to utilize him on the court.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell how this season will really develop so early on. Only one game under their belt, and I feel like this is a good warm-up for what's to come. Little Rock is a tough opponent, but they're not going to be the hardest opponent, so it's going to be really interesting to see how, can they, with this warm-up, can they really improve from that, learn from their mistakes, and really bond together as a team, because that can be really tough on morale to have that first game of the season, having high anticipation, and then having that very close loss. Hopefully that doesn't get under their skin, but it'll be interesting to see how they're able to really pick themselves up from that. But with that in mind, their next game is going to be Texas State versus Miami, Ohio. This will be Saturday, November 11th, and this is also going to be an away game. So they have a couple of away games starting off this season. So hopefully whenever they come back home to Texas State, that we can have a super high attendance and really support them. So that's also really rough going to that first game, being an away game, being in grounds that you're just not super comfortable with, practicing at Texas State for such a long time leading up into the season. All right, let's talk about the other half of basketball, women's basketball. Texas State versus Arlington Baptist Patriots. This is ABU, and this was in a home game on November 6th at Strahan Coliseum. The final score was 90-48. Win. Now that is how you start off a season right there. That is a win right there. And just talking about, we have such amazing players this season. We have Julia Coleman, who is a new upcoming player, a freshman, outshining with the most points at 13 points that game and 6 free goals made. And then we have a couple of other players. I'll give you a little bit of chance to talk about that. What other players do you think will be able to really pick themselves up, whether new or returning?
So, one returning player that I'm really looking at is Kennedy Claybrooks. She's, had the opportunity. She's had the advantage of being able to learn from last year playing with Denasia Hood, playing with Kennedy Taylor, kind of getting that knowledge and being able to understand the game a little bit better is probably going to help her out. She's still pretty young, fairly young, so I'm really excited to see how Kennedy Claybrooks will perform throughout the rest of the season. But as for this game, it was really a team win, I would say. I mean, you're looking at 90-48, 90 points, and your top scoring player had 13 points. So that just goes to tell you, everybody was really hitting the mark. Everybody was really playing well, producing good points, good scoring. So it's very exciting, to see this new women's basketball, the way it's going to shape out, considering that they've lost such talented players in Denasia Hood and Kennedy Taylor and Tiana Eaton. All of these graduate players that were there last season are just not there anymore. So now all of a sudden you're looking at Coach Antoine, and she's got to kind of flip the switch and kind of build these players up to being their own Denasia Hood, their own Kennedy Taylor. And in my opinion, I think Kennedy Claybrooks is going to be one of the more experienced and one of the more knowledgeable players that can probably help out the team a lot at the point guard position.
And just to kind of piggyback off that, the head coach Antoine, she was talking about how she was excited with the new players and stuff, and especially with the challenges of bringing new faces in and finding ways to compete. You have to, these are brand new players coming in with a different team. They don't know how to play with them, and for them to absolutely dominate the first game is very exciting to see. So it's going to be very exciting to see them in the season and just see how they perform in the future. And then, just freshman Julia Coleman is just dominating, the MVP of first game. That's just very exciting to see. And like I said, it's going to be really exciting to see what they bring in the future.
Yeah, it's not just Julia Coleman. It's Nicole Leff with 11 points, who is a returner. And then we also have Jalen Foster, who is new, transferring over with 10 points. And just looking at this team overall, the roster has 8 newcomers compared to 4 returners. And that's a very common theme throughout, is that a lot of teams have had at Texas State are having a lot of new players and not a whole lot of returners, and so that's going to be really interesting to see how are these teams going to be able to bond well together. How is this going to turn out? Because there's a lot of uncertainty going into the season. But seeing that, as you had mentioned, Jacob, that 90-48, there's evidently something going on right that this team has. So that's a very promising start for this spring season. So that'll be really interesting. All right, and with that, their next game will be Texas State versus Bowling Green Falcons. This is going to be Saturday, November 11th. We have a lot of games that are going to be happening on November 11th, and this is going to be 2 p.m. home game at Strahan Coliseum. So make sure to show up. This is going to be their first home game of the season, so this is going to be a big game. Make sure to show up for that. All right, let's get into our final sport, volleyball. Now, they're kind of closing off the season, and they've only had a couple of games left, and so they're just about to end that. But they had 3 games this last week. That's quite a bit to have coming towards the end of the season, with Texas State going against Troy for these first 2 games. November 3rd, away game, both away games, and then also a second game on November 4th. Going into these games, both games had a 3-1 win for Texas State. And KJ Johnson for this first game, absolutely killing it with 17 kills and her 9th double-double of the season. Very impressive. And then Jade DeFrey and Samantha Wunsch, we've been mentioning a bunch of times, been just star players. Jade DeFrey in particular with 6 blocks, and Samantha Wunsch, who has been normally a very high kill scoring player, also had 6 blocks. Not quite as many kills as KJ Johnson, but not too far behind. And while Troy won that first set of that first game, Texas State afterwards for these next 3 sets didn't even let them get above 20 points going into these next 3 sets after that. So they didn't even give them a chance to really have a close game after that first set. And going to the second game, Texas State versus Troy on November 4th, it was just an amazing, because with that win, Texas State volleyball has acquired the top seed of the West Division with 11-1 record. Samantha Wunsch absolutely killing it with 20 kills. Bailey Hanner with 7 blocks, absolutely killing it out there. And then this is their 7th straight year to win the West Division. And with an overall score against Troy, 19-0 all-time against the Trojans. So going to this game, I've heard a lot of people have a little bit of skepticism saying that this might be a tough game. But I really, at the heart of it, just looking at the history, I don't think they were going to have too much trouble going into this game. But that leads us into our next game. And this is kind of where Uno reverse occurred, and this was going to be a tough game as they were going against Coastal Carolina, who is the leading team for the East Division. What do you guys think going into this game?
I think going into this game, it was always going to be a difficult game. We knew that from the start. But saying that, having been at the game last night, it was a very back and forth game. We did end up dropping the game 3-1 on sets. However, regardless of what the sets are at the end of the game, it didn't come through in the back and forth nature of that game. We didn't get blown out at all. It was very, very, like I said, back and forth between the two teams. Both teams had problems with referees as well in the game. I'm not saying the referee had a big part in the game. Reviews after review after review got it right. But both teams, you could tell, really wanted to beat each other because they knew that going into this game that this could be the matchup in the actual Sun Belt Championship game for volleyball. So the tension was there. And, of course, we're going to talk about it as well. This, is going to be the matchup tonight as well, the Friday game as well, the last regular season game. So there's that as well to talk about.
Yeah, and that game's going to be happening at 6 p.m. today, so make sure to show up for that. Last game of the season, there's going to be a lot of hype going around with that.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna be recording that game, so it's gonna be a very interesting game to see how it turns out. But I'm super excited though, really excited.
Yeah, you think of that game, that's a good opportunity for the Bobcats to come back, take that throne back. Obviously, we knew it was going to be a tough matchup. And you look at the game, each set that Texas State played, they scored over 20 points. And so you look at that and you have to assume that, okay, Texas State kind of understands they have something going here. And, they come back next day at it, they do it again. And I believe they can get it done, They really, really going to have to focus in on that blocking, like you mentioned. I think the blocking was very important for Texas State going into this game. And, ultimately, it's what helped them versus Troy. And I've had many conversations with Coach Hewitt. That's one of the areas where he believes that they should really be focusing on a little bit more. He's always mentioning Texas State volleyball is always going to be great. Texas State volleyball, and as you mentioned, the West Division champs, once again, it is nothing new to Texas State. We have a very, very talented volleyball program, and I think, this year, from the very beginning, it's going to be interesting to see how the team produced without Janelle Fitzgerald, without Emily DeWalt. And, they bring in KJ Johnson, who is the clear-cut most dominant player, although we have a lot of very talented players and dominant players as well. Like you mentioned, Jade DeFrey. She's really good down low in the middle blocking area. Like, she's very talented. But KJ Johnson just kind of seems to be, the running motor for this team. Every game, it seems like she's getting a double-double. You mentioned she had 9 all over the season. So, KJ Johnson has just been so impressive, in her 5th year, coming to Texas State, joining Texas State, and it's her first year here. Hats off to KJ Johnson because she has had an incredible game. But it really is just, I think Coach Hewitt has done a really, really good job with this program in terms of making sure that he knows his pieces and he knows who can do what in certain areas and putting them in positions to be successful. So, you look at this next game versus Coastal Carolina, I think they're going to come back with something to prove. I think they're going to come back and kind of take this game by the throat, because at the end of the day, it is kind of like top dog versus top dog in the West versus top dog in the East. And so, Texas State is certainly going to come back, with some vengeance tonight, I think.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, KJ Johnson with 5 years. This next game, this final game, is going to be senior night, and they're going to be honoring their 3 graduates, KJ Johnson, as you mentioned, but also Sophie Childs and Megan Woods. And those 3 are unfortunately going to be graduating, and so they've all had some very important roles going into all of these games. And especially with KJ Johnson and Samantha Wunsch just going hand in hand, with his last game getting both 14 kills. And it's going to be really interesting to see these very top players leave And with that, what will this next season look like? What will the next fall season look like? And that's going to be very interesting. But anyways, that's Texas State versus Coastal Carolina, November 10th. That's today, 6 p.m. home game. Make sure to show up. Give our volleyball Texas State players support for this. But with that, thanks for joining us in today's episode of the weekly Bobcat Breakdown. As I wrap up, remember to subscribe to the Bobcat Bulletin YouTube channel so you can stay updated on all things Texas State athletics. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week.